and welcome to Springfield Career Insights. Tonight, we turn to a subject that is both intimate and national, both domestic and institutional, the discipline of the child and the destiny of the society. Is discipline a tool of oppression or the foundation of dignity? Is permissiveness an act of love or the quiet sabotage of a child's future? And what happens when homes abandon their duty, leaving schools, workplaces, and justice systems to carry the burden? In this episode, we ask, what becomes of a nation when children are raised without correction? Who pays the price when parents retreat from parenting? And can a society truly prosper when its citizens were never taught to withstand the weight of responsibility? We are joined by His Excellency Dr. Godfrey Gandawa, President of Springfield Research University, legal advisor, and continental architect of Education 6.0. His work reframes discipline not as punishment, but as the civic engineer of character, the first institution of national stability, and the cornerstone of future leadership. President, we are honored to host you.
Thank you, Dr. Advocate. At Springfield, we hold a simple but profound truth. Discipline is destiny. It is not cruelty. It is construction. It is not oppression. It is preparation. The home is the first government, the first school, and the first justice system. When discipline collapses there in the home, then every other institution now inherits the consequences.
Thank you, Professor. Why do we pretend adult dysfunction is mysterious when it is usually the predictable harvest of childhood neglect?
Thank you, Advocate. So there is nothing mysterious about the adults we produce. Society behaves as though broken adults fall from the sky, as though rudeness, entitlement, dishonesty, and emotional chaos are spontaneous eruptions of adulthood. But adulthood is never spontaneous. It is a continuation, a culmination, a harvest. Every adult is carrying the echoes of their childhood. Every behavior is a memory of what was allowed, what was ignored, what was rewarded, and what was never corrected. We are not dealing with accidents, Advocate. We are dealing with outcomes. We pretend to be shocked because the shock is easier than accountability. It is easier to blame society than to confront the truth that many adults were shaped by years of unchallenged behavior, years of emotional indulgence, years of boundaries avoided in the name of love. But the truth stands. A neglected childhood always matures into a complicated adulthood. And until we confront the early formation, we will continue to act surprised by the predictable adult.
Thank you, Professor. What exactly goes wrong in a child's early formation that later produces adults who are chaotic, entitled, and unmanageable?
Thank you, Doctor. What goes wrong is not sudden, eh? It is slow. It is silent. It is subtle. It begins in the small moments, the moments adults dismiss as harmless, the moments parents excuse because they are tired, busy, or afraid of confrontation. A child interrupts an adult and no one corrects it. A child throws a tantrum and the room rearranges itself to accommodate the chaos. A child refuses instruction and the parent negotiates instead of leading. These moments look small, but they are not small. They are seeds, and the seeds, advocate, always grow. When a child learns that emotion overrides instruction, they grow into an adult who weaponizes emotion. You see? The other day I was in court. Another lawyer was using emotions. So when a child learns that rules are optional, they grow into an adult who treats accountability as an insult. You are asking them to be accountable, they think you are insulting them. When a child learns that consequences can be escaped, they grow into an adult who believes responsibility is for other people. You see? The tragedy is this. We do not lose children in one dramatic moment. We lose them in 1,000 tiny permissions. Okay? Tiny permissions that accumulate into character. Tiny permissions that mature into entitlement. Tiny permissions that eventually harden into the adult who cannot be led, who cannot be corrected, and cannot function in any structured environment. So, what goes wrong? What goes wrong is the absence of early boundaries. What goes wrong is the silence of adults who should have spoken. Advocate. What goes wrong is the comfort that replaced discipline, the indulgence that replaced guidance, and the fear that replaced leadership. And by the time we meet this child at 25 or 30, we are not meeting a mystery. We are meeting the final version of years of unchallenged behavior.
Thank you, Professor. How early does the manufacturing process of a problematic adult actually begin?
Okay, thank you, Advocate. So it begins earlier than most people dare to admit. Not in adolescence, not in school, not in the teenage storms we love to blame. Because people say, "I'm a teenager." No. It begins in the quiet, ordinary moments of early childhood. The moments adults dismiss as cute, normal, or just a phase. You know? The manufacturing begins the first time a child screams to get their way and succeeds. Is it? It begins the first time a parent chooses peace over principle. It begins the first time disrespect is laughed off. The first time defiance is negotiated. The first time a boundary is bent because the adult is tired. These are not small cracks, Advocate. They are the blueprint. They are the early architecture of character. So, a child is not born entitled. Is it? Entitlement is taught. A child is not born disrespectful. Disrespect is tolerated. A child is not born unmanageable. Unmanageability is rehearsed. And every rehearsal becomes a habit. Every habit becomes a pattern. And every pattern, therefore, becomes a personality. By the time the child is 7, 8, 9, the foundation is already poured. By the time they are 12, the wiring is already installed. By the time they are 18, the operating system is already running now. And by the time they are 30, society is dealing with the final product.
So how early does it begin?
It begins, advocate, the moment adults surrender their responsibility to shape, to correct, to guide, to insist. It begins the moment childhood is treated as a playground instead of preparation ground. Because childhood is not a rehearsal for life. Childhood is life's construction site. And whatever is built there will stand or collapse for decades to come.
Thank you, Professor. What damage is caused by parents who are terrified of saying no to their children?
Thank you, Doctor. When a parent becomes afraid of the word no, the child becomes afraid of the world. Because no is not just a word. It is a boundary, a mirror, a compass. It is the first lesson in reality. It is the first encounter with limits. It is the first moment a child learns that desire is not destiny. Parents who fear saying no are not protecting their children, advocate. They are disarming them. They are sending them into a world that will not negotiate, a world that will not bend, a world that will not apologize for its structure. A child who hears no grows up believing that discomfort is injustice. You see? They believe that correction is cruelty. They believe that authority is oppression. And when life finally says no, as life always does, they collapse. Not because the world is harsh, but because their foundation is soft, you see. The damage is deep. A child raised without no becomes an adult who cannot regulate emotion, cannot handle disappointment, and cannot accept responsibility. They become fragile in the face of pressure, volatile in the face of feedback, and hostile in the face of accountability. And here is the tragedy, Doctor. Parents who avoid saying no are not raising confident children. They are raising unprepared adults. Adults who will interpret every boundary as betrayal. Adults who will treat every correction as an attack. Adults who will walk into workplaces, relationships, and communities expecting their world to rearrange itself around their impulses. So, what damage is caused. Is it? The damage is generational. The damage is societal. The damage is the creation of adults who cannot function in any environment that requires discipline, patience, or humility. A parent's no is not rejection. It is preparation. It is the training ground for resilience. It is the birthplace of character. And when parents abandon that responsibility, the world becomes the first real disciplinarian. And the world disciplines without mercy.
Thank you, Professor. Let's take a break and listen to a song called Borrowed from Forever.
We didn't plan the way the night would bend, how every second lost its sharpened edge. You laughed and all the clocks forgot their hands. The city blurred but you stayed sharp and grand.
Your fingers traced the outline of my day, and every fear I carried slipped away. Right there between a heartbeat and a breath, forever took a step toward us and left.
I don't know why we named it, but I know what it became. A moment with no exit, a flame without a frame. It felt borrowed from forever, like time had looked at us and bound. Just a stolen little never-ending, hidden in an ordinary crowd. If tomorrow never finds it, I'll still know that it was true. For a moment, forever placed itself in me and you.
We talked like we had met in other lives, finishing thoughts we'd never realized. Your eyes were holding stories I could read, pages turning without any need. No promises, no contracts to be signed, just gravity between your heart and mine. The night resigned its duty to move on, and all my yesterdays fell quiet, gone.
I don't know what we'll call it
When the years look back and see, but I know that in that second time, knelt down on one knee. It felt borrowed from forever, like time had looked at us and bowed. Just a stolen little never-ending, hidden in an ordinary crowd. If tomorrow never finds it, I'll still know that it was true. For a moment, forever placed itself in me and you.
Maybe love is not a lifetime,
Maybe it's a single spark, bright enough to light a journey through 1,000 nights of dark.
if I never taste that moment,
In the same way ever again,
I will thank the
quiet heavens that it happened there and then. 'Cause we borrowed from forever, and forever let us win. Just one fragment of its kingdom, wrapped in moonlight on our skin. If the world forgets a story, my heart will remain the proof. For a moment, forever signed its name on me and you.
And if time ever asks what we became, I'll answer softly.
Sikhumbule lokho kuthandzana kwetfu.
Welcome back. Let's continue with our discussion. How did we reach a point where correcting a child is treated as cruelty, but raising an undisciplined adult is not?
Thank you, Doctor. We reached this point because comfort became a culture and courage became a rarity. Somewhere along the way, society rewrote the definition of love, you see. Love used to mean guidance, boundaries, and accountability. Today, love has been reduced to softness, to avoiding discomfort, avoiding conflict, avoiding the hard conversation that shape a human being. We began to worship the child's feelings and abandoned the child's future. Okay? We became so afraid of being labeled strict, harsh, or old-fashioned that we surrendered the very tools that build character. So correction became cruelty. Discipline became oppression. Boundaries became trauma. And yet, the real cruelty is not correction. The real cruelty is releasing an unprepared child into a world that will not bend for them. A world that will not negotiate with their emotions. A world that will not apologize for its expectations. We have created a generation where parents fear their children, teachers fear their students, and society fears telling the truth. But the truth remains, a child who is never corrected becomes an adult who is constantly wounded by reality. You will hear them say, "You always do that to me. You always do that to me," in court. We reached this point because we replaced the parenting with appeasement. We replaced the leadership with negotiation. We replaced the responsibility with indulgence. And now we are shocked when the adults we produce cannot function, cannot cooperate, cannot handle pressure, cannot accept responsibility. Correction is not cruelty, advocate. It is construction. It is the scaffolding of character. It is the architecture of resilience. It is the gift that prepares a child for a world that is structured, demanding, and unforgiving. So the real cruelty is not the parent who says no, you see. The real cruelty is the parent who refuses to prepare their child for life and leaves society to deal with the consequences.
Thank you, Professor. What happens when parents outsource discipline to time, luck, or society instead of doing the work themselves?
Thank you, Doctor. Then when parents outsource discipline, they are not postponing responsibility. You see? They are transferring it. And the tragedy is this. The entities they transfer it to are not gentle. Time is not gentle. Luck is not reliable. Society is not patient. You see? A parent who refuses to discipline is not avoiding conflict. They are scheduling a catastrophe. Because discipline is not something a child can figure out later. You see? Discipline is not a skill that magically appears at 18 or at 25. You understand? Discipline is installed early through repetition, correction, and consequence. When parents hand that responsibility to time, the child grows older but not wiser. They age, but they do not mature. They accumulate years, you see, not character. So time does not teach discipline. It only exposes the lack of it. When parents hand that responsibility to luck, they are gambling with a child's future. Lucky is not a strategy. Lucky is not a curriculum. Lucky is not a mentor. And when luck runs out, as it always does, the child is left standing in the world with no internal compass. And when parents hand that responsibility to society, society responds with force, not compassion. Society disciplines with consequences, not conversations. Society disciplines with systems, not sympathy. Society disciplines with laws, not love. A child who was never corrected at home will be corrected by the world. But the world corrects with a cold hand. The world does not explain advocate. The world does not negotiate advocate. The world does not care about your feelings, your childhood, or your excuses.
So what happens when parents outsource discipline?
A child grows up unprepared. A teenager grows up ungoverned. An adult grows up unmanageable. And society becomes the emergency room for wounds that should have been treated at home. Parents must understand this truth, advocate. If you do not shape your child, the world will. And the world shapes with steel, not softness.
Thank you, Professor. How does a child who never hears stop or enough become an adult who collapses under pressure?
Thank you, Doctor. So, a child who never hears stop grows up believing that limits are optional. A child who never hears enough grows up believing that desire is a command. And when you raise a child in a world without limits, you create an adult who cannot survive a world full of them. You see? Pressure is not the enemy. Pressure is the test. So, pressure is the moment life asks, have you been trained? Have you been shaped? Have you been strengthened? But a child who was never told stop, was never trained to pause, you see? A child who was never told enough, was never trained to regulate. They enter adulthood with no internal brakes, no emotional boundaries, no capacity to enjoy discomfort. So, when pressure arrives, as it always does, they do not bend, you see? They break. They do not adjust. They collapse. They do not reflect. They react. Because pressure exposes what childhood failed to build. So a child who grows up without boundaries becomes an adult who cannot handle consequences. A child who grows up without correction becomes an adult who interprets feedback as violence. A child who grows up without discipline becomes an adult who panics at the first sign of resistance. And here is the painful truth about it. The world is full of adults who crumble, not because life is hard, but because childhood was easy. Too easy, too soft, and too unstructured. So children who are never told stop become adults who cannot stop themselves. Children who are never told enough become adults who are never satisfied, never grounded, never stable. So pressure does not destroy them. Pressure simply reveals that they were never prepared.
Thank you, Professor. Why do adults who were never corrected interpret boundaries as an attack?
Thank you, Doctor. So adults who were never corrected as children grow up in a world where their will was law, where their emotions were commands, where their impulses were treated as identity. So when they finally meet a boundary, they do not see structure, they see betrayal. So a boundary is supposed to be a guide, a quadrant, a guardrail, a signal that says, this is where responsibility begins. But to the uncorrected adult, a boundary feels like rejection. It feels like disrespect. It feels like someone is trying to shrink them, silence them, or break them, or control them.
Why?
Because they were raised in an environment where discomfort was treated as danger, where correction was treated as cruelty, where accountability was treated as oppression. So when adulthood introduces the normal now, health limits of life, limits that every functional human being must navigate, they interpret those limits as personal attacks. Tell them no, and they hear, you are unworthy. Tell them stop, and they hear, you are unloved. Tell them enough, and they hear, you are being punished. Tell them you are wrong, and they hear, you are being destroyed. This is not emotional sensitivity. It is emotional illiteracy. It is the inability to separate instruction from insult, guidance from hostility, truth from harm, advocate. And here is the deeper tragedy. When a child is shielded from correction, they grow into an adult who cannot survive truth. Truth becomes violence. Feedback becomes humiliation. Boundaries become warfare. These adults are not reacting to the boundary in front of them. They are reacting to the boundaries they never met in childhood. They are fighting ghosts, not guidance. And until we understand this, we will continue to misdiagnose the problem. These adults are not fragile. They are untrained. They are not being attacked. They are being confronted by reality for the first time. A boundary is not an attack. A boundary is a mirror. And some adults are terrified advocates of what they see.
Thank you, Professor. What does it look like when the justice system becomes the first entity to tell someone no?
Thank you, advocate. When the justice system becomes the first voice of discipline in a person's life, it is already too late. Because the justice system does not speak in the language of guidance, you see. It speaks the language of consequence. It does not whisper. It does not negotiate. It does not soothe. It arrives with steel, structure, and finality. A child who never heard no at home eventually hears it from a judge. A child who never faced consequences in childhood eventually faces them in handcuffs. A child who was protected from accountability eventually meets accountability in its harshest form. And the tragedy is this, advocate. The justice system is not designed to raise human beings. You see? It is designed to restrain them. It is not a teacher. It is not a mentor. It is not a parent. It is a mechanism of last resort. When the justice system becomes the first real disciplinarian, the story is already written in pain. It looks like a young man standing in a courtroom, confused by the idea that rules apply to him. It looks like a young woman shocked that her emotions cannot negotiate her way out of consequences. You see? It looks like adults who are meeting structure for the first time and mistaking it for oppression. Because when you grow up without boundaries, boundaries feel like brutality. When you grow up without correction, correction feels like cruelty. When you grow up without accountability, accountability feels like an attack. So the justice system is society's emergence breath. It is activated only when every earlier opportunity for guidance has been ignored, avoided, or abandoned. It is the final no, the one that cannot be argued with, cannot be softened, and cannot be postponed. And here is the painful truth. Prisons are full of people who should have been corrected at 5, not arrested at 25. They needed a parent's voice, not a prosecutor's file. They needed boundaries in childhood, not bars in adulthood. They needed discipline early, not discipline enforced by the state. When the justice system becomes the first teacher, the first lesson is always expensive advice. And the invoice is paid in futures lost, families broken, and potential buried.
Wow, this is amazing. Let's take a commercial break and stay tuned.
At Springfield Research University, we don't teach to pass exams, we encode futures. Grounded in Education 6.0 and powered by STEMMA, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, medicine and automation, we deliver modular, sovereign learning across undergraduate, master's and doctoral programs. Explore our prospectus, where every curriculum is designed to stematize every discipline, dignify local authorship, and credential transformative knowledge. Be stematized, be sovereign. Here, knowledge is authored, not borrowed. Curriculum is credentialed, not copied. Every graduate becomes an architect of transformation, With 2 annual intakes, March and September, the path to innovation is always open. From the logic of automation to the soul of indigenous intelligence, SRU is where tomorrow is designed. Springfield isn't just a university, it's an epicenter of epistemic dignity. Join the movement. Study where learning governs itself. Springfield Research University, the globe is here. Where are you?
Welcome back. Let's continue with our discussion. How do schools, workplaces, and communities end up paying the bill for parents who refuse to parent?
Advocate, thank you. You see? So schools, workplaces, and communities become the unwilling accountants of parental neglect. They inherit the invoice for every boundary that was never set, every correction that was never given, every consequence that was never enforced. And the bill is always heavy, heavier than most people realize. So in schools, the cost appears first. Teachers become crisis managers instead of educators. Classrooms become battlegrounds of entitlement. Instruction is interrupted by emotional explosions, defiance, and disrespect that should have been addressed long before the child ever held a school bell. Teachers are blamed for behaviors they did not create and expected to fix the wounds they did not cause. You see? Then the workplace receives the next installment now. So employers inherit adults who cannot take feedback, cannot follow structure, cannot manage conflict, cannot regulate emotion. You see them. Nogajana. Teams are disrupted. Productivity collapses. Leadership pipelines choke under the weight of adults who were never taught the basics of responsibility. Workplaces become rehabilitation centers for childhood failures. And they were never designed for that role. And finally, communities now pay the highest price. Neighborhoods absorb the consequences of adults who cannot coexist, cannot cooperate, cannot contribute. Conflict rises, violence rises, instability rises. Because when a discipline is absent in the home, disorder becomes present in society. And the truth is simple and brutal, Doctor. Every child who is not disciplined at home becomes a public responsibility. The burden shifts from private sphere to the public sphere, from the parent to the teacher, from the home to the employer, from the family to the community, and eventually from society to the justice system. We must stop pretending that parenting is a private act with private consequences. No. Parenting is a public investment with public outcomes. When parents refuse to parent, the entire nation becomes the emergency response team. Schools cannot raise children. Workplaces cannot repair adults. You see? Communities cannot carry the weight of homes that abandoned their duty. And yet, they do every day at a cost that grows with every uncorrected child.
Thank you, Professor. Why is it dangerous to expect teachers, pastors, or the internet to do the job parents are running away from?
Thank you, Doctor. So it is dangerous because none of these institutions were designed to carry the weight of parental responsibility, you see. So teachers are trained to educate. not to raise. Pastors are called to guide, not to parent. And the internet, the most chaotic, unfiltered, unpredictable space in human history, is not a mentor, not a guardian, not a moral compass. It is the marketplace of everything. You see? Wisdom and foolishness, truth and distortion, brilliance and poison. So when parents step back, hoping these institutions will step in, they are not delegating. See? They are abandoning. They are leaving the most delicate, most formative, most sacred work of human development to systems that were never built for it. Teachers can reinforce discipline, but they cannot install it at will. They can correct behavior, but they cannot rewrite character. They can model structure, but they cannot replace the daily, intimate shaping that only a parent can provide. You see, expecting teachers to raise children is not support, it is surrender. Pastors. Pastors can inspire values, but they cannot enforce them. They can preach morality, but they cannot parent morality. They can speak truth, but they cannot supervise behavior. A sermon cannot replace a household. A church cannot replace a family. And the internet is the most dangerous substitute of all. You see? It does not love your child. It does not protect your child. It does not correct your child. It simply reflects whatever the child searches for, whatever the algorithm rewards, whatever the world is shouting that day. And the internet is a teacher without ethics, a mentor without boundaries, a companion without conscience. When parents step aside, children are raised by screens, shaped by strangers, mentored by influencers, and disciplined by no one. And the result is predictable, advocate. A generation fluent in expression but illiterate in discipline. A generation connected to the world but disconnected from responsibility. A generation with information but without formation. It is dangerous because parenting is not a role that can be outsourced. It is not a task that can be delegated. It is not a responsibility that can be transferred to institutions that were never designed to carry it. When parents run away from parenting, society does not receive a child. You see? Society receives a problem, a big problem. So a problem that schools cannot fix, churches cannot heal, and the internet will only worsen. Parenting is the first government, the first school, the first church, the first justice system. When that government collapses, every other institution pays the price.
Thank you, Professor. Why do adults who lack discipline in childhood struggle to form stable relationships?
Thank you, advocate. They struggle because relationships, you see, require the very skills that discipline was meant to build. You see, skills like patience, skills like compromise, skills like emotional regulation, skills like accountability, skills like self-control. And when these skills were never installed in childhood, adulthood becomes a battlefield of unmet expectations and unmanaged emotions. So a child who was never told wait becomes an adult who cannot tolerate delay. A child who was never told no becomes an adult who interprets boundaries as betrayal. A child who was never corrected becomes an adult who cannot apologize. You see that? A child who was never held accountable becomes an adult who blames everyone else for the storms they create. Relationships now collapse under these conditions because relationships are not built on feelings, they are built on discipline. You see, the discipline to listen, the discipline to compromise, the discipline to control impulses, the discipline to communicate without exploding, the discipline to stay when things are difficult instead of running at the first sign of discomfort. Adults who lacked discipline in childhood often enter relationships with the emotional reflexes of a child. They expect their partner to soothe every frustration. You see? They expect their partner to absorb every mood. They expect their partner to tolerate every outburst. They expect their partner to bend, adjust, and accommodate. Because that is what the adults in their childhood did. But relationships are not childhood, you see. Partners are not parents. Love is not indulgence. And here is the deeper truth, advocate. Undisciplined children grow into adults who confuse love with rescue. They want a partner, but they behave like they want a caretaker. You want me to repeat this?
Yes, please.
They want a partner, but they behave like they want a caretaker. They want affection without accountability. They want loyalty without responsibility. They want intimacy without maturity. And when the relationship demands growth, they interpret it as pressure. When the relationship demands compromise, they interpret it as control. When the relationship demands accountability, they interpret it as attack. The relationship does not fail because love is absent. It fails because discipline is absent, doctor. You see? Love without discipline becomes chaos. Commitment without discipline becomes conflict. Intimacy without discipline becomes instability. Stable relationships require adults who were shaped, not indulged. Adults who were guided, not appeased. Adults who were corrected, not cuddled. Because discipline is not the enemy of love. Discipline is the backbone of love.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, before we conclude, if you had one message, one final distilled truth that you would want every parent, every teacher, and every adult shaping the next generation to take home from this conversation, what would it be?
Yes. Thank you, Albert. So if I had one message to leave with every parent, every teacher, and every adult shaping the next generation, it would be this. Do not fear discipline. Fear the absence of it. Because the absence of discipline is not freedom. It is abandonment. It is the slow, silent collapse of a child's future. A child who is not guided will be governed by their impulses. A child who is not corrected will be corrected by the world. A child who is not taught boundaries will grow into an adult who breaks them and then blames everyone else for the consequences. To parents, your love must be strong enough to say no, consistent enough to mean it, and courageous enough to endure the discomfort that comes with raising a disciplined human being. Teachers, you're not just delivering content, you are reinforcing character. Your firmness is not harshness, it is civic duty. You are shaping the citizens we will one day depend on. Society, you cannot demand responsible adults while celebrating irresponsible childhood. You cannot expect discipline in the workplace while tolerating chaos in the home. You cannot build a strong nation on weak foundations. If there is one truth I want to leave with you, it is this. Discipline is not the enemy of the child. It is the architecture of their future. It is the gift that outlives you. It is the inheritance that cannot be stolen. Raise children who can withstand reality, not children who collapse under it. That is how we secure families. This is how we strengthen communities. That is how we build nations. Thank you, Advocate, for having me.
Thank you, President, for reframing discipline not as punishment, but as sovereign architecture, the civic engineering of character, the foundation of dignity, and the first institution of national stability. Your insistence that childhood formation is not emotional indulgence, but civic responsibility, reminds us that the home is not a private space, it is a constitutional space. It is where citizens are drafted, shaped, and prepared for the weight of adulthood. To our audience, if you're ready to elevate your parenting, teaching, and leadership into structured foresight, if you're ready to raise children who strengthen rather than sabotage their own sovereignty, Springfield Research University awaits you. Visit www.springfieldresearchuniversity.net and join the mission to build families, institutions, and nations with disciplined wisdom. That brings us to the end of this diagnostic edition of Springfield Career Insights. May tonight's reflections provoke discipline, foresight, dignity, and sovereign resilience in every home and every institution. I'm Clarence, your host. Good night.
Hey, hey, siyakupuga.